Yeah, I just had the child care center that uses a building there isn't here, so a whole bunch of maintenance wants to get done on it. So just stuff. I recorded a video this afternoon, kind of long conversations. I'm still figuring out this how to juggle everything. So
Yeah,
how have you been?
pretty good. Busy. Work's been real busy. I was just today catching up on all your videos, so that's all swimming in the back of my mind now, which is interesting. It feels like there's been kind of a thematic relationship, though, in a lot of your recent videos, especially. I don't know. Of course, maybe this is just the lens I'm looking at everything through, but I've been reading a lot of Barfield, so.
I just did a big video today on Barfield.
Oh yeah,
one. So I'll post that tomorrow.
What was the high level?
Well, just his basic thesis and how that addresses the meaning crisis, which is the divided world. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, I did a conversation with someone who is a graduate student of philosophy, who he basically using panpsychism to try to rebalance the universe, and that was interesting. Part of the problem is that I'm living my videos, I'm living sequentially, and just because of how I have to manage all the conversations, the conversations get posted later.
Yeah.
So actually, one of the ideas that I'm thinking about is because I'm trying to figure out what to do with, so Peterson's going to have this whole new thing he's releasing. And of course, Patreon is still out there. And so one of the things I'm thinking is maybe having a subscription service where I post at least the videos that I know I have permission within the sequence, so that maybe subscribers could see them early in the sequence, so they wouldn't be out of sequence with the other videos. But this isn't my full-time job, and I really can't let it become that way. That's not fair to the church. So I'm just trying to keep everything balanced. So
yeah, that's going to be tough.
Yeah. And summertime is busy because my kids are home from school, and my wife, my wife is home from school. So there's just always a lot of stuff to balance in the summer. So, but no, Barfield is, so I used one of Malcolm Gates.
Yeah, he's got some interesting YouTube videos.
Yeah.
He kind of gets a little bit into stuff, but he gets a good summary, I think, of some of his ideas.
So tomorrow will be a big, and of course, if we release this, it'll be a long time. All the sequence will be messed up, but tomorrow I'll release that one. I've got a pattern now of releasing them in the morning, at least in the morning California time, and that's been working for me. So today I released the conversation with 4 of us. That was fun. I want to figure out how to let some of the people talk with each other. I had a conversation with Mary and Cassidy, and yesterday I recorded a new one with Nick from Santa Cruz, who's been in 4 cults. That was a great conversation Nick and I had yesterday. And so I'd love to see some of the people interact with each other. And I know that's happening behind the scenes. But
it would be nice. I know you mentioned, I caught a bit of that one. You mentioned maybe having a sub channel. That might be interesting too.
Yeah.
Where, and I know one of the comments that came out of that was, well, what percentage of those conversations would be interesting or useful? And that's fair. And that's one of the reasons why it might be good to have a sub channel, as you point out, but it might not even be important what percentage of them are interesting as that the conversations themselves happen. And then that might kick off something else that is interesting, as part of this community.
And that happens all the time. Sometimes you'll be in a conversation and, it's just kind of going along and doesn't seem to, and then bang!
Off. Yeah.
It's like, oh, now the whole conversation is different. Even the stuff we had before. Sunday, I preached a sermon in which a lot of the sermon is kind of this getting up to something, and then at the end, now suddenly you realize why I had to go through all this stuff. And part of our problem in this ADHD culture is we have so little patience to, because so many things you have to do. You have to pay your dues, you have to do your homework, got to get there before you get the payoff. And today we just want instant gratification, and many of the best things in life doesn't work that way. So
yeah, a lot of the Barfield books I've been reading, he'll refer to other languages without any sort of translation, whether it's Greek or French or whatever it is. And I realize he's just assuming that, oh yeah, if you're literate in this period of time, these things,
Yeah.
And even logos, when it's written, in the original Greek, you're like, oh, what is that? Oh, okay, it's logos, but it's,
well, and
assumptions about the dues you pay back then are much greater than we have to us today.
Oh yes. And I'm reading this book on Erasmus, Fatal Discord. It's Erasmus and Luther. It's a great book, but Ron Dart recommended it to me, and it's. I didn't realize how formative Erasmus was in developing what would become the dominant classical education, liberal arts education in the West. I mean, it was Erasmus that set that thing into motion. But you had Erasmus and Luther, and oh, wow. So today, the last couple of days, I've just had a deep dive, not really a deep dive into Barfield, but just an immersion into Barfield, because I was making this video and taking some Vervaeke stuff with it, and because it's really, Barfield is really helpful in the Vervaeke area of exploration, because I scheduled a conversation. John and I are going to talk in a couple of weeks, and I don't know how much Barfield he knows, but and I know other people, Barfield's going to unnerve some people, because we like to, especially with a very literalistic view of Scripture, that sort of implies a very flat assumption about language.
Well, that's the soup we live in.
Yeah.
Is that we're all scientists, and that we're using this language in very technical ways.
Right.
And that when we say things, they have very precise meanings.
Right.
But yeah, how many of the words did you invent? Right. Not many, if any. Yeah.
Well, when you watch the video tomorrow, I think you'll appreciate it. I hope you'll appreciate it. Most of the videos I do, after I finish doing a video, I always feel a little embarrassed by it, because it's like, oh, that didn't go so well. But then it's like, I spent all this time doing it. What am I going to just delete it? No, I'll just put it out there. And sometimes, like the C.S. Lewis kindness video, I almost didn't post that, because like, am I really going to talk about politics? That's just going to be a headache for me. But I'll just put it out there, and maybe no one will watch it. So I noticed that people don't, like, it's summertime now, so that actually the channel's in a little bit of a lull, because people are busy in the summer with other things. Mm-hmm. And weekends too don't tend to get as much traffic. So if there's a video that I think, I'll just put it out on a Saturday, and maybe no one will watch it. But people seem to like it, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, which scares me some days. Maybe years from now I'll say, why did I post anything? I don't know.
I think it's clear whatever's going on, it's something good. That seems clear, based on the fruit of it so far. So
yeah, that's something I think so too. If I didn't think it was good, I would stop. So yeah, and I'm not stopping. So what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about?
I guess one of the things, there's so many things, like one of the things is, I don't know if you remember an email I wrote you back about kind of tweaking the meaning as Jordan Peterson's sacrament. I kind of put a twist on that to say more just this idea, I guess, that meaning is very corruptible, and it takes place at these kind of unconscious or subconscious levels, and so it has this great dependent. It's almost like this computer that's always going, and And it has this reliance for your relationship to meaning to be meaningful in some sense, you have to have this connection to the truth. And so I guess what I was coming away with is that at the top of Peterson's hierarchy is the truth. And again, from his perspective, the truth isn't something you can really access. We're always at this remove from it. But we are aware of, occasionally we're aware of when we consciously lie. And that this is the thing that kind of began his autobiographical journey to where he is now. It's kind of like the thread he pulled on. Because as soon as he decided, I'm going to notice every time I consciously want to lie. And it's funny too, because he mentions that the lying is kind of like in his book, The 12 Rules for Life, he talked about like, I can feel it in my solar plexus. Like when there's something in me, or he uses the phrase, I feel like I'm being pulled or twisted apart versus coming together. That's how I know when I'm saying something I really believe, I feel I'm getting power and like I'm becoming stronger. And when I say something that I don't believe, I have this sense of being pulled apart. And that really had an impact on me and made me think that one of the things that happens when you lie is that you further slice the world up into smaller pieces, including even yourself. And, I talked about last time about how I had this realization of nihilism and that this was kind of, it's funny because I would have never considered myself a nihilist, but what I realized listening to Peterson was that was kind of, my life was compartmentalized in all these different areas, and that my default way of filling a block was nihilism. So if something wasn't going the way I wanted it to, like a relationship or my job, or whatever else, I could just like draw a little box around that and be like, okay, within that frame, I'm just going to treat this as meaningless. And I think we're encouraged to do that again with this kind of technical use of language. We think we can kind of slice the world up and kind of cut it into these little pieces, and that we're doing so in a very clever way. And it's because we've I think Luke said it the other day, like in your thing I was listening to today, this idolization of the intellect, and kind of falling in love with the product of that and the kind of nice, clean lines that it produces in the imagination that what it is producing is knowledge. We don't realize that we've taken this living thing, we've cut it apart, and it's lying dead on our little examination mat. And now all the function and form of it has now been lost to us in its current state. You mentioned a lot in a lot of your videos how time plays into things, and it's some of this use of language is an attempt to try and like pause everything and like, because that gives us the illusion that we understand something. It's this oversimplifying, magnifying lens that we're using to break the world into pieces. And I know that I'm going all over the place with this, but it's hard for me to draw this thread together because I see it everywhere. It's really the kind of the soup we're living in the age that we're in. And there was a Barfield quote I have here that kind of draws a little bit of this. This idea, we all imagine not only do we imagine ourselves as scientists, but when we look back into history, we imagine all these other people as scientists, and we're like, oh, they're failed scientists. And he says, imagination, history, bare common sense, these are nothing beside the paramount necessity that the great mumbo jumbo, the patent double million magnifying inductive method, should be allowed to continue contemplating its own ideal reflection. A golden age in which every man was his own Newton in a world dropping with apples.
That's a great line.
So I think we because we live in this world where all these scientific advances have happened, we kind of all imagine ourselves that we are scientists in some respect, even though we're not even doing it well. We're doing it very sloppily. We're kind of, but I guess the method of reductionism as a way to understand things is kind of taken for granted now. As that's what the way you produce understanding is you slice this up into kind of small boxes. And what you find this often finds itself revealed in is a false dichotomy, right? It's either this or that. Right. You know, like you're either left or right, you know, and if you're not right, you must be left. And if you're not left, there's no complexity left in the world. Everything's kind of black and white. It's like this kind of overwhelming desire for certainty that's driving everything.
Well, I often that desire for certainty comes up, so I read Frank Schaeffer's book, Crazy for God. Frank Schaeffer kind of makes the desire for certainty into a boogeyman of sorts, into a demonic figure. I don't think it's so much a desire for certainty as a desire for mastery and control and outcomes, because again and again we want certainty. Our certainty does have a sense of beauty in it, but it's not that we want certainty in the same way we want beauty. We want certainty as instrumental so that we can ensure outcomes as a function of our wills. Because, I mean, part of what I think wind the tape back, part of why we decided to make this exchange, and Barfield uses as an illustration Odin exchanging knowledge for one of his eyes.
Yep.
Why on earth would we make that exchange? Well, clearly there's something we want out of it. And a lot of what we've gotten out of that, if you read, let's say, Yuval Harari's Homo Sapiens, is, hey, famine, disease, war, these things that have really ravaged humanity have, at our time and place, been to a great degree pushed down and away. And that's not a small thing. And that, in a sense, puts others who are tempted to say, yeah, but to Steven Pinker, that kind of puts them back on their heels, because this is no small thing. But for me, this then boils down into the question of, well, what actually, and I use my little cell phone stand a lot in this video, what exactly is the role of matter in the universe? What is its role? What is it for?
Yeah.
And this is a way of let's say, asking a Gnostic, because a Gnostic would say, well, this is perhaps a passing phase and we're moving on to a matterless existence. But in Christianity, no, we're awaiting resurrection, not just immateriality.
Yeah.
And so in the Christian worldview, what is the telos of matter, of stuff? And I think obviously it's glory, and matter communicates glory. I was pondering. I listened to, for exercise, I've been walking lately on a levee in Sacramento that, by the river in the morning. It's really lovely. And I was driving back, and there was a car at the intersection driving through, and it was a poor couple, a bad car. I live in a fairly poor neighborhood, and so you just look at, and you get a picture of, just knowing here, I get a picture of their lives, just to imagine aspects of their lives. And so it's like, okay, how do they live in the world? What function does stuff play for them? These are, not unimportant questions, especially in a world that says, well, this is finally what matters, especially because a bullet to the head or a noose around the neck is a pretty consequential thing. So one of the things that one of the long-term projects that I continue to roll around is, okay, so So we've got the ideal, we've got the subjective, we've got all this stuff going. What's the role of stuff? I don't know. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah. It's it's a tough one. Yeah. It's gets down to a level that we have a tough time thinking about. One of the things Barfield talks about in terms of language, because language seems to be this thing that is basic unit of thought. But he points out that a lot of languages in their infancies tend to be much more poetical. This comes out in his Poetic Diction, which was kind of his big first published work that he dedicated to C.S. Lewis. He wrote it right after the
Great War
letters, yeah, and he dedicated it to Lewis with his dedication was "Opposition is True Friendship," because they kind of really butted his heads, and Lewis did kind of force him to strengthen some of the more logical sides of his arguments. And actually, some of the language came directly from. So he referred to poetry, and what we get out of it is this felt change of consciousness, where it's like we're at this level of consciousness and we ascend to this other level. And it causes this feeling that we like. I think Vervaeke kind of mentions this too, in his kind of this sense of realization, this aha. And one of the things he points out is that poetry in its infancy was, or rather language in its infancy was always more poetical, because it had this connectedness to the language, where language had this life in it. And now now that we've divided language in all these pieces where you have to use this very precise way of doing things, he says that the poet's job is to kind of rediscover beneath the landscape how these things are connected. And the roots are still there beneath the ground. You can go find them, and then you connect them, and then you have that aha again. Like you're rediscovering these sorts of connections. And it's interesting, I see this theme in terms of a lot of people in your last conversation, like with Luke and his orthodoxy, right? In the sense that we went wrong at Augustine. And there's this sense in which I totally agree with that in a certain sense, but I also see that, well, do you think that God abandoned the leadership of the church? Well, that would be crazy to think, right? Or even if you think a further turn that we took in the Protestant Reformation, where again, it's this, you can see there's this good and bad. There's a process where something's being fleshed out into all these kind of, I think Luke called it intersectionality, for religion is Protestantism, where we have this kind of splitting and splitting and splitting. That to me seems like there's a lot of bad in it, but it does allow for this further exploration of things. And I guess I'm trying to figure out where is this all moving towards? Is there any hope for some sort of, reunion of the body here and now because, that's one of the things Jesus always says, they'll know you're my disciples by your love for each other. Yeah. And that's a little bit harder to see nowadays because, most of the ways in which we define ourselves as religious communities is how we're different from the other people. That's how we represent ourselves.
Well, one of the Fatal Discord book is so helpful on some of these issues. Maybe it's just so helpful for me now because I'm paying attention to so Barfield very much sees an evolution of consciousness. And so you had, let's say primitive participation or primary participation, and then you have this split world where the person thinks that the rest of the world is dead. Well, that's an advantage and disadvantage. It's lonely, but it's useful for all of the colonizing and manipulating things. And then, of course, Barfield says, Geit at the end of the one lecture that I post mentions that Barfield in the 70s thought, before each major turn in this, there's always a period of instability. And the 70s was very much an unstable decade. And in some ways, I feel that we're in a period similar to the 70s in some ways. But, the Protestant Reformation, there was so much going on there in terms of many of these types of issues that Barfield is talking about. And so the contrast between Erasmus and Luther is so instrumental there, because what Erasmus was doing was he began to, so everyone was excited about texts. You have late Renaissance humanism there, and Erasmus he wants to, now printing is going out. So what he can do is they can do a side-by-side comparison of the Latin Vulgate, which was done by Jerome, and then they're trying to set the Greek next to it. And some of those differences, Jerome's Vulgate was not put together with a great amount of care. And that document served as the Word of God for the Roman Catholic Church for 1,000 years almost, by the time you get to Erasmus and Luther. And one interesting, let's just use one example out of Ephesians 5, Jerome calls marriage a sacramentum, in Latin, a sacrament, but in Greek, it's a mysterion. And you see that, and you realize that Erasmus puts that out at the Reformation, and, hey, boom, there's a division that we're going to have.
Did the Vulgate translate other places where it says mysterion to sacrament? That's interesting.
Well, I don't know, but that's just one notable. There's a lot of examples like that.
Yeah.
And so this is part of why the book is interesting. But so you've also got the combination then of the printing press. So you've got this, increasingly you have this thing that we are so used to living with called public opinion. And think about how public opinion would be mediated before the printing press. Think about, there's this thing that we say, the Bible is the Word of God. What's the difference between spoken speech and written speech? And, even Plato was concerned about, and Vervaeke talks about, now you have a Greek alphabet. Now writing is getting easier and easier instead of hieroglyphs, which are all these symbolic. So now you have an alphabet, and suddenly words on a page are different from things spoken in air. And now we're talking into YouTube, where it can be, rewound and propagated, and you start putting all these things together, and it's like, oh wow. So Barfield is, it could be that we are going to see Barfield's time come soon as we begin to process that. Maybe when Aristotle saw that things, this moves towards the earth out of love because it loves, earth. This is, highly refined earth in a way.
Yeah.
And so it moves on purpose. Well, no, it doesn't move on purpose. There's this thing called gravity. I took a trip down the rabbit hole on this. Someone sent me, people sent me stuff. Was it Doug Lazar, the YouTube, or the Area 51 guy with the spaceships and the flying saucers, and we're talking about gravity. And the truth is, we have no idea how gravity works. And
well, the other thing we don't know is what role God is playing in all this. I think is G.K.
What God is. What do we mean when we say that word?
But G.K. Chesterton had this thing where he said, well, we don't know that God doesn't take great delight in doing all these little things around us. That maybe our Father is younger than us, and that he still has this great delight in making a flower bloom and the sun come up every day, and that the wonder of it all hasn't been lost for him like it has for us in some sense. And Yeah, I think there is something in our reductionism that we lose so much, right? It's this filter, or as Jordan Peterson, it's a map that covers the world. We don't see the world, we see our map of it, you know. And the reason we have that map is, like you pointed out, we want control. We want to make sure that when I do X, Y happens reliably most of the time. And if it doesn't, you know, I can quickly, you know, using this map, figure out why. And so that desire for control, I do think it does eliminate a lot of our ability to just enjoy and have gratitude, because we have these very defined ideas of how we want things to be, and we think if it was this way, it would be good. And then we get it that way, and we're like, oh, well, not just a little bit different, and it'll be good, you know. And like, it's interesting how we iterate through this and haven't yet seemed to figure out, you know, what is it we really want, which gets really big into those issues of agency, in terms of, you know, you were talking with in your 4-panel discussion today with, you know, Joe was saying how this idea of a God that's like, oh, you're so crappy, but I'm gonna love you anyway. And I don't, it seems, I don't know, like it, I can understand why he would feel that way, and why you could write a version of, and I couldn't believe in that God either, you know. There seems to me that, I don't know, there's this sense in which sometimes when I feel like I'm actually having something that is revelation, that it's a sense of, you know, Peterson uses this, it's like something I already knew. And like, I think C.S. Lewis uses this language as well. It's like, it's your remembering. It's almost like, and when it gets kind of weird and mystical, but like, it does make me wonder to what degree is God operating in our consciousness, you know? Is that a necessary component of consciousness, that God is present in some way, like that maybe it can't really exist without his interaction? And, you know, there's this extent to which we are separate, which is a good thing, right? Because it allows for love. Love couldn't, if it was just all one, it wouldn't, like, love wouldn't be possible. And so, and it seems like in the Christian story, love is the supreme thing. And it does require something like voluntary, you know, there has to be a voluntary element of it. I guess that's one of the things that scares me, you know, because there's still a part of me that there's the cynical side of me is still there, the nihilist, that like I'm still uncovering areas of my life where like I still have that kind of default nihilism, and what it buys you again is like the ability to just, well, it doesn't matter what I do here, so I don't have to pay that close attention to it. And it allows me to reduce, right? Because if I don't care about these areas, it allows me to care more about these other areas that I think. So it's like it's a way of using that scientific magnifying lens to be like, okay, only these things matter, and these things over here don't matter. But it seems like what we really want is to have everything matter. You know, all the little details. Yeah. That they're all part of the story. Like, you know, when you go back and read the story again, oh, well, you didn't realize that turn there was really important. Yeah. And you thought at the time you missed it, but I think that's what we really want, is to have a life that is suffused with more of those moments that had a real impact and a real effect on the larger story. Yeah. And even to have those moments mean something later. There's a thrill and a joy in that too. Barfield has this great, which is, again, is in the video, this great
realization that he and Lewis had, where, if you take a wire and you pass it over the magnets, you generate current. That's how we generate electricity. And he noted that it's the change, it's the change in the polarity that gives the
change felt consciousness.
Right. The change felt conscious. Lewis put the felt in. And that's so true. And yeah. And so so if you're watching a movie, movies are, this medium where you always have to remind you, in a good movie, everything is intentional. It's like I think it was a Chekhov or someone who said, boy, if you have a gun in the first act, somebody better be shot by the third. Nothing will be wasted. And when we look at our lives, we not only want that, but we also want it to be true in the past, so that when something comes in the future, and I just talked to Karen about suffering a little bit, and that's part of the dynamics of suffering, part of the dynamics of redemptive suffering, so that when something comes in the future, the past is redeemed. And that the stumble when it happens, or the loss when it happens, something coming in the future, Christianity has this idea of greater glory. And if we were to watch a movie in which a bunch of happy people get everything, we would not watch the movie.
Yeah, that would not be a good story.
Only the good stories are nail biting and cliffhanging and disaster, but always hope. And so it's these changes that. But yeah, as people, what do we want for our children? We don't want. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to stumble. But then, my children are now young adults, and you watch them and they do stuff, they make decisions. It's like, they're going to pay for that.
Yeah.
Wish they wouldn't have to, but they will. And that's life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. Sorry, my brain just went like 5 different directions at once. Your conversation the other day with I can't remember her name, from England, with the tough to understand accent. That was so. What was her name?
Shiobhan.
Shiobhan. That was
Shiobhan. I had no idea how to say it. But I said, how do you say your name? Shiobhan. It's kind of like Yvonne, but with.
It was very interesting listening to her. It was interesting for me because I grew up in that tradition where, like, people are saying things all the time, and it's like, how do you sort between, somebody's thoughts and what's real? It's interesting.
It's very interesting. Well, it's and it's so what we've done. Again, I just have this video that I made fresh on it. So at the end of the one video that I played with Malcolm Geit talking about Barfield, he brings up Thomas Kuhn. And Thomas Kuhn, The History of Scientific Revolutions, which is a book I read in college in a philosophy class. And that really impressed me when I read it in college. If I reread it now, it would probably doubly impress me. But he makes the point that, when there's a reigning paradigm in science, that reigning paradigm acts like a filter. And if you go to a Pentecostal church, if you're a pastor, you will always have people coming up to you telling, well, even if it's not Pentecostals, well, I think God wants this. This is what God wants. And then usually if you're the pastor, it's like, okay, pastor, this is what God wants. You go up in the pulpit and turn the screws on everybody about this thing that I'm telling you that God wants. As a pastor, it's like, oh, okay. Well, when it's your turn to preach, you can go right ahead and let's see how that goes. But this is a part of life, and that's why I was so delighted that she called and just shared openly. And I was first going to put a little front piece to make a few disclaimers. No, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to
I think it was good. I mean, I got a lot out of it, honestly. And I mean, it was, I think it's clear to me that God has to speak to people. Like, you had a conversation a while back with what was the politician's name? Was it John Wood?
Oh yeah. John Wood Jr.
Yeah. Where he was talking about his interactions where God, he decided to imagine that God existed. And then once he did, he started talking to him.
Yeah.
And it's funny how that is. There's something like we have to have, if all we see is this filter, if we don't amend that, that's all we'll see. If we don't ever cut through the filter, if we don't imagine another possibility, that's all we will see is that map. So I think that's why sometimes it's so important that we talk to people with different points of view, why we, have real experiences with matter, with things that oppose our will, and like we have, we get things wrong. That's, Peterson says, that's kind of where we experience the transcendent the most, is in error. If we don't have those moments of error, we don't get to find out, hey, this is, there's more here than I thought. One of the things that brought to my mind was the whole thing with, going back to this Eastern versus Western in the church. One of the things I thought about, with all these icons is, like one of the, I guess the Protestant, way we would look at icons and some of the things the Catholics do is that, these things are being confused for God, right? There's like, they're idols. And what occurred to me listening to a lot of people talk about these is like, okay, well, actually, I think most people can look at those and like they're the fact that they're made by humans is written all over them. Like, so we know in some sense you could confuse them for being something divine and worship them instead of God. But I think there's something about them that keeps it in front of us that they were made by humans. But then when we shift over into the Protestant world, where now we don't have some of those things and it's all about our ideas about God, it's much more easy for me to confuse my idea about God for being God than it is for me to confuse that icon.
So some images are not, so a lot of images are verbal.
Yeah.
Those don't get filtered out. No, that's a number of people have, that's an important point to keep in mind. Jonathan Peugeot always says symbolism happens. And I might tell him at some point, iconoclasms happen too.
Yeah.
It's happened, in the Orthodox Church, there's been these iconoclastic moments in Orthodoxy. So no, these are really interesting. These are really interesting dynamics.
Yeah, but it does seem necessary that there's this kind of destruction of the old before the new can come into play. And if what we really want is that change you described, that felt change of consciousness, we have to be willing to go through the pain of that death and rebirth. And it's hard because I think Eric said this the other day on one of your discussions, like we have this tendency to have a faith in answers themselves. We want to get to the right answer and be like, I'm done. And I got here ahead of everybody else, so I'm right.
Yes. Well, again, I think that's connected with the certainty thing, that we want answers because, again, answers are manipulable for us. And once we have them, they become instrumental to us. And with these answers, we can then achieve, secure, and all of this in independence from God. These are ways that our rebellion against God gets expressed through those answers. Yeah. And this is all part of our rebellion against God. And this, I think, sets up Lewis's lovely phrase where, we are rebels who must lay down our arms, and God as I talk sometimes the masculine and the feminine. We are, in terms of our relationship with God, we're the feminine. God will have us.
Mm-hmm.
The way, the man has the woman. And so then the part of joy, that it's a feminine joy that we discover of being, not being had by a con man, but being loved and possessed and cherished by a lover. And that's the joy. But unless you can understand inequality, the blessings of inequality, you cannot have these particular blessings. Lewis calls it the specific pleasure of the inferior.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting that that point, the point you were making about John Wood Jr., Peterson, there's some real stuff is so complicated. I mean, Peterson's acting as if God is real. If you don't believe, that's not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
And there's a video.
What's funny is he contradicts himself, because he says he doesn't act as if God exists, because that's why
right.
he can't say it, right?
That's right.
But I do like that he takes that very seriously. I think it's a part of him taking point on that truth thread. Like, he's still mulling it over, whether he can say that truthfully or not.
Yeah. Well, there are layers to it. So someone today sent me a little Russell Brand video that was on Twitter, why I believe in God. And he actually goes into the act as if God exists. He follows Peterson in there, because we know that he and Peterson have spoken at least twice. But the question you asked her, the first line in his video is, I believe God to be limitless consciousness, and then goes on from there. And I thought, I'm going to have to do a video on this Russell Brand thing. But, so when I listened to Russell Brand go through his little video there, part of languaging this kind of stuff is so difficult. And that gets to the icon question with the Eastern and Roman Catholic churches, the images, because, Protestant churches continue to try to use verbal images. Oh, those can get idolatrous too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because and if you listen to, so I was listening to a thing from an Orthodox church in the middle of the country going on, Gospel of John and mystagogy, and they kept just talking about the things that cannot be spoken, and there's always kind of at some point you have to realize the limitations of language, but you don't want to do that too soon, and you don't want to do that completely, because the word becomes flesh, and the Bible actually communicates with us in written form. And I think in many, many times we don't think enough about that aspect of the Bible.
Yeah.
And much of the Bible, it's postulated, is actually recorded speech. And I think sometimes if we...
Recorded in the sense somebody was writing down what someone was saying out loud.
Correct. But at the same time, you can't push that too far, because especially if you look at, other parts of the Bible, it's clear that it was consciously and intricately structured to produce certain effects. Words are chosen. And then you have these parts of the Bible, the New Testament in particular, quite likely that Jesus spoke Aramaic, and so that you're reading Greek. And so then part of what happens is you say, well, what might have been the Aramaic beneath this? And you get into something like the Gospel of John. There's all these word plays in Greek, and say, well, those don't work in Aramaic. So where's this coming from? Is it really coming from Jesus? Everyone should have a class or maybe no one should have a class in, New Testament studies. you get into these things all the time, which is probably part of the reason I've gotten into this whole Jordan Peterson, Vervaeke, Owen Barfield rabbit hole.
Yeah. Back on the thing with the line, there was a thought I wanted to wrap up there was, one of the things that I think Peterson discovered was that anytime you lie, in a sense, like I said earlier, you're making this extra compartment. You're making, in a certain sense, there's some sort of power in our speech that you can't not believe to some extent the things you say. It's one of the studies of neurobiology is that like people always remember the things they say more than anything else. And there's something that you become attached to that. And what he found was that, you can't twist your use of language without twisting whatever it is inside of you that you use to delimit truth from error, that thing gets twisted anytime you consciously lie. And that his sorting himself out thing is it's all connected to this trying to, and his articulation of it, you can't ever know you're saying the truth because again, you have this removed from the truth, but you can take note of the conscious lie and try to work your way back from those. And try to undo the lies that you've kind of built into your being, as a way to kind of, and I think that's kind of why he takes it so deadly seriously anytime he says something. You notice like when he talks, he's very, very careful. And it seems like it's this attempt to kind of stand back from himself and watch, is what I'm going to say next what I really believe? Which is, I think what I think is part of what makes him really charismatic. I think there's this sense in which, I've had this kind of intuition lately that there's this correspondence between truth and charisma, that charisma is a way in which truth is broadcast in kind of nonverbal ways, so that there's some sort of correspondence between what's being said, the contents of what's being said, and then something else that we're picking up on. And so that it's a sense in that we can know, okay, because we're all kind of tuned towards, we're kind of information scavengers, right? And so when somebody has this kind of, they're broadcasting signal X and this other correspondence to it, when those two things come together, it's like, oh, we're like, oh, okay, here's some good information. This has been tested in some real way. I can glean something of value here, even if it's just about, it could be about very trivial things. But we'll listen to somebody with that kind of charismatic element all day long because there's something that they're saying, something about us turns on and says, hey, there's something valuable here. I can learn from their experience rather than go through my own, rather than, so much of what we hear, there's this kind of BS quality to it. For instance, I work in sales in the security field, and I just realized this the other day. Like I've kind of gotten bored with security, and there's a lot of things about security I love. Like it's a very, there's new things, new exploits. So much is going on in that space, and it has real impacts. Like people are getting hacked, and thousands of dollars are going to cyber criminals. Hundreds of thousands, millions. And this is happening every day. So there's like this real thing at stake. But I'm around so many people that are talking about it that don't care about it, but they're trying to sell something. So like I imbibe that belief that this is boring. It's not boring, but when you're talking, when you're dealing with people that aren't really interested in the thing they're talking about it, even though they're trying to act all jazzed about it, I still receive this, oh no, it's boring. This is all BS. Don't pay attention. Even though that, that's the exact opposite of what they're trying to communicate. Right. But that's the undercurrent that really is what gets inherited. Because there's so often when we're communicating, there's a complete disconnect between what we say and what we mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's some of the way we kind of sift out who's intelligent enough to have a conversation with, is like, do they get those nuances? Are they sophisticated enough to figure this out?
Yeah.
It's like little tests where we, and I don't even think we realize we're doing it, but we, it's just interesting.
No, that's really good. I like the correspondence between truth and charisma. And and when it comes to sales, a few years ago, so we always do these fireworks booths for nonprofits, and so it was the band from the high school my kids were going to, and the director says, well, why don't you come down to the show at the beginning? You needed a ride, so you had all these people that are like, let's get fired up about selling fireworks. And so they're like, and I always get, once my wife, we could get free tickets to Legoland for my kids if my wife and I promised to sit through a timeshare sales talk. And my wife was like, don't say anything and we'll get out of there in the shortest amount of time possible. But I couldn't, the cynicism thing, they'd say stuff and it'd be like, and so then I would start asking questions, and I was just trolling them, because there's no way I was going to buy this timeshare. And I just wanted to troll them so bad because they were saying things that were just such lies. And when people do that to me, I usually don't say no. I usually like to do I do the troll thing. It's like, really? Tell me more. I used to play a game when I homeschooled that telemarketers would call a house. I used to play a game of see how long and ridiculous I could keep the telemarketer on the line, which is really cruel because these poor people are working crap jobs for minimum wage. But I just, it's a devil inside of me. But no, but that I think you're so right. I mean, in this Erasmus Luther thing too, Luther. So when I was talking to Ron Dart, one of my first talks with him about Erasmus and Luther, the thing about Luther was, I mean, he hit a nerve in Europe that just, in Northern Europe, not in Southern Europe, Northern is just whoosh. I mean, and it's like, I don't know if my father, when we go camping, my father would light the fire. Don't do this at home. He would take a little Dixie cup with Coleman fuel and put it in the bottom there. And it was a real cool thing because it's a very flammable cup, but it only burns from the top, again, because of oxygen, as long as the cup maintains its shape. So you'd put this little thing and then you'd light it. And of course, when fire ignites, there's a whoosh. Yeah. And with Jordan Peterson in our culture, there was a whoosh. And I think part of it was he was speaking certain truths that once certain groups of lies get built up in a culture, it's that dead wood. And then all you need is someone to light it on fire, and there's a whoosh.
That's a great point.
And off it goes. And it's going to be hot, baby. No, I really like that, the correspondence between truth and charisma. It's so true. And but Peterson is right, though, too, that you will, and there's something that I always point out to people about the story of Jesus, because we so like to turn Jesus into hagiography, which is some glowy story. And he did 3 years of talking, and people who were normally mortal enemies of each other could agree that the world was better without him. Now some people are just jerks and everybody wants him dead, but nobody looks at Jesus that way. In other words, the truth was just so brilliant that they had to kill him.
Yeah.
And that's telling. And of course, the Gospel of John deals with that in the prologue a bit, but because the world loves the darkness. We love the darkness because it lets us get away with what we want to. Yeah. And I love what you said in this video about the lie. I think it's really good. I think it's really good. I'm tired.
Yeah.
You had anything more? I got a little extra time because you're the last talk of the day.
No, but I would like to put it out there just that if anybody wants to talk about Owen Barfield, if they're happening to read his stuff, um, and they're looking for a conversation partner, I'd be interested to have those conversations with anybody. I find his stuff it's difficult because he is assailing a lot of the Western mind, especially the book where the Great War between
Have you read it?
I'm about 90% through, but it's very difficult because, I'm very aware of the fact that I know the way they're using the language isn't necessarily how I use it. Like their use of the word spirit over and over again. I'm like, I don't think they mean this by what I mean. And it's very clear there's some technical, because even Lewis in his conversion state is using spirit quite frequently. So that book's really hard, but there's a lot of things like that. I got like halfway through it, and then I started Poetic Diction, which it's a little bit easier for me because it's all from one voice. Whereas the book of the Great War, it's somebody else's filtering of all this content and letters. But like in the Great War book, like literally every page is just underlined. There's so much good stuff, and the same with Poetic Diction. There's I don't know. It seems there's this thread that's going through a lot of your conversations, I feel like. And I was actually hoping your conversation with the quality existence lady would go more into some of these things. I think underpinning her idea of this metaphysics of quality is this idea of truth as a process, and ultimately, I think it makes sense. Truth has to be a person. From my own, like just thinking it through, it's got to be something more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Calling it a process doesn't get far enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how often, again, like, and she even brought this up in your talk, I'm okay with this kind of pantheism of like consciousness and like the Tao or this force. But then once you move into the personal God that has its own desires and plans and telos for the story, it gets scarier.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets a lot.
I find that for myself too, because again, I think you can't read the Bible without realizing what it's moving towards is this union. And, as I said last time, I believe that union costs God something very significant, but I think it also costs us something significant as well.
Yes.
And there's a sense in which maybe salvation is really linked to, we have to kind of, if you don't live a certain kind of life, you can't be the sort of person that would even want that. Yeah. Lewis talks about, if you want to keep your heart safe, you gotta make sure you don't attach it to anything, not even a pet or anything else. You got to keep it locked in this box. Right. But locked in that box, it's not going to be the same thing. It's going to rot, and it won't be what it started out with. You can't keep anything in the clean room, right? Nothing stays the same. It has to either, I think he said, we're like eggs now, and we have to be hatched or we go bad. You can't just stay safe in where you're at. And it's scary because it's like, well, what it seems clear that union is intended to cost us quite a lot, but there's a lot we gain from it, and I don't exactly know what that is, but I have kind of intimations at times that makes me think, yes, it's wonderful. But other times I'm like, it's scary. And I can see why people on the outside of that looking in can have moments where like, oh, what does this God really want?
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. And God will have his way with us, and that terrifies us, and rightfully so. But we touch on these kinds of things in life. When you marry, you bind yourself to this other person, and you bind yourself to the narrative of their life. And in a world as dangerous as this one, boy, there's a lot that can happen. And you're exactly right with Lewis's illustration about the heart. And I do believe that when I read Genesis, the central drama is about love and trust. Do we trust in God's love? Do we trust that God finally has our well-being at heart? And here's the kicker. We don't get to decide what well-being is.
And we wouldn't know even if we could.
Right. And Larry Crabb, who, I got a whole bunch of Larry Crabb books. He was a very popular author in Christian circles about a decade ago. Larry Crabb, defined basically our fallenness as defining good and evil on our own. And that's the heart of our rebellion for Larry Crabb. And so when I listened to, I just dropped a little bit of the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris conversation. When Sam Harris both considers well-being as self-evident, and then he goes and defines it, because that which is self-evident need not be defined. But he's, Sam Harris is.
Yeah, that was the funniest part of that thing. He didn't even, because remember he said at the end there, he said, my ethic is it's reason, and then he just kind of pulled out of a hat, motivated by love or guided by love, or like, and it was like the weirdest moment. Like it's like he knew that word doesn't have any real significance outside the Christian story. Like in some sense, he knew he was pulling the outside of his frame into that. Like he would call it smuggling Jesus, but he just smuggled something outside of his frame into the story.
That's right.
It doesn't make any sense in that frame.
Right. And I see, and I talked about, I ended the video with this, or it was towards the end, where I noted that. So when you look at Thomas Kuhn and the history of scientific revolutions, at the end of a paradigm, people are continually try to adapt in their paradigm in ridiculous ways to try to maintain it. So when they're continuing to try to do the math on the motion of the planets before Copernicus, that just gets endlessly complicated. And Copernicus basically says, no, the math is better if you do it this way. And in a sense, that's exactly where Sam Harris is at. Because I'll talk to people, why do you like Sam Harris? Well, Sam Harris is an atheist, but he has spirituality. And it's like, oh, that's kind of like, I'm married, but I have a girlfriend. Okay, Sam. You're giving up. It's like when I heard Dan Dennett on An Unbelievable Thing. So everything is matter plus information. Oh, tell me about that information. What exactly is that? It's not matter. What is it? So now that you're back into formal causes with Aristotle, and he's a philosopher, he should know that. But matter plus information. It's like y'all are losing the game, and so you're fudging, trying to keep it together, and at some point it's gonna flip.
It's funny too, because with Sam Harris, he's so rational and reasonable. He's kind of like, it's like the emotion is drained out of him, but like he also denies free will and consciousness in a certain sense, right? Like that these are like, and I would say nothing is more readily apparent to you at any given moment of your whole life, that you have that here I am right here, right now, and I have some choice, right? I can look at this, I can look at that. I have, in these decisions, these little decisions have consequences, right? And somehow he can somehow use this reasonable thinking to override the most present, like all of his, quote unquote reason and scientific method, all that comes to him through this filter, and yet he can't see the thing that he somehow, it boggles my mind how you could come to that conclusion of like, okay, it's all an illusion. Yeah. I can see why within a reasonable, like in a deterministic universe is, there's where the consciousness comes in. That's why I think God has to be involved somehow. Like he's right. You can't add determinism or even randomness from the outside. That doesn't get you free will. There has to be some other third thing. But I find him, he's an interesting person. I wonder what's in store for him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to go back and I think I'm going to listen to, the first two.
I think there's a lot of stuff to be mined in there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, there is. So anyway, but that's for another day. So thank you, Michael. This has been a delight. And here's an idea. So, what happened with the four-way conversation that I did with Luke and Job and Jeff was they put that together. So maybe, if you can think of some of the other people who've been on my channel, I don't know if Mark Vernon lives in the UK, so that makes timing a little bit more difficult for him. But, if you can think of some people that you'd like to bring in for a Barfield conversation, let me know. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with. So, basically I've got the system with the link and a conversation, and I've just sort of been using the limited, because I can only do this so many hours a week for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So that's sort of been limiting it, but it's still first come, first serve. And then I've got so I have to figure out a sorting mechanism, and I am loath to make it a pay to play type thing because I don't like that type of filter. But I can understand it in other ways, and I don't. One way to go would be if I just chose who I spoke with. But I think part of what has made this whole experience for me interesting to me is that I don't know. I didn't know you. You found me. And if I was doing the selecting, the world is full of people like you with, that I see them on my channel. And if I'm the filter, and then people have to, send me an email, and, then you have an audition of sorts. But that doesn't work either, because some of the most interesting people I've spoken with, I might not have.
Takes a while to get them going. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about this, and, hopefully I don't know. I'll keep working on it. We'll see where it goes. The whole channel has been to see where it goes.
Yeah. If anybody's out there and you want to do a Barfield conversation, please hit me up. The other thing I want to note just real quickly is that I had the idea with taking some notes.
Yep.
That I was putting in some of the. So one of the ideas I had out of that too was just to have like a master document that other people could edit.
Yep.
Of links to all kinds of notes, because I realized a lot of people probably don't want to come back over and contribute edits to somebody else's notes, but maybe there's other things that they're working on, and if we had like just a master document that anybody could put a link into, maybe it's a link to like somebody's reading poetic diction like I am, and they want to just put some of their like quotes from it or other things like that. It could be a master document that just links to all sorts of other stuff that people are working on. If they have like writing they're doing, because not everybody has a blog or things like that, but they do like I write all the time, like in Evernote, but I don't really publish anywhere. But that might be a way for people to connect in terms of, some people write better than they talk, and, they like to do that instead.
You gave the suggestion last time of a Google Doc. And so I did include links in some of the videos and some of the notes of the videos of a Google Doc where, like for this, I took some notes during this conversation. I don't know. Originally, when I started this channel, I actually thought of maybe using a Google site, which is sort of like a wiki.
Yeah.
Where
are they still around?
Wikis?
The Google sites that still exist.
Oh yeah. It's up there, and so because especially early on when I was doing the commentary things, which I really want to get back, I really want to. I got so many things I want to do, and I just don't have the time to do it. But I think you're right. It'd be nice to have kind of a structured, written thing, because part of the reason I started taking notes during conversations was I'll wind up posting these 2 or 3 weeks after the conversation. And when I'm doing the title slide or even the title of the video, it's like,
Yeah.
what did I talk to him about? And so the notes are helpful, but figuring out a way to do this. Now, some of the teasers that Peterson gave of this Think Spots thing that he's working on,
That's some of those pictures.
Where you could, like comment things in different places of videos or something. So I'm looking forward to see what that looks like.
And that will be open to creators of all sorts to use as a platform.
Yeah.
Idea. Okay, that's cool.
So, and that'll be a subscription model. So, I mean, it's so complicated. So, yeah, I mean, this whole video YouTube thing has been such a cool new thing for me over the last year and a half, but adding a lot of complexity and still trying to figure out where this all goes, how to let it grow and flourish naturally. And I think there are some technical things that we can do to help it grow, because what I do want to see are more and better conversations.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, this will be out. This won't come out this week. I got a whole bunch of conversations in the can. I just talked to Karen Wong, who's posting conversations on her YouTube channel too, and she's like, well, I still got 2 I haven't posted. You put so many out. It's like, you should see the size of my can. I got a lot. I don't have a lot right now, but I don't want to post more than 1 a day. Even 1 a day is a little fast in some cases. So
yeah, I appreciate that, because it helps me keep up. I can always keep up with about 1 a day, even when I get real busy.
Anyway, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your time as always.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.